You know that feeling when you order a mixer online because the pictures look sleek, the specs promise 80 channels of pure control, and then you finally plug it in and realize the workflow feels like you're trying to drive a race car with a stick shift. I've been there, and I've also heard from a lot of fellow engineers who say they've wasted a ton of time learning shortcuts that never work on the real stage. That's why I'm doing this deep dive review, so you can avoid the disappointment that comes from buying a console that looks perfect on the listing but doesn't fit your actual gig. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of setups where the Soundcraft C Impact actually shines. If you run a mid-sized church, a community theater, or a mobile DJ service that needs to handle multiple inputs and outputs without a second person frantically swapping cables, this 40-channel digital mixer gives you a lot of headroom. The 32 mic preamps mean you can mic a full drum kit, a full brass section, and still have room for a few line-level instruments. The 32-in/32-out USB interface is a real lifesaver when you need to run multi-track recording straight into a DAW without a separate audio interface. I've seen sound engineers hook the C Impact directly to Pro Tools and capture each channel cleanly, which cuts down on setup time and eliminates the need for a separate rack of converters. Now, who should consider buying this mixer and who should probably look elsewhere? If you're a solo performer or a small band that only needs a handful of inputs, you're probably overpaying for capacity you'll never use. The C Impact's strength is in handling a lot of simultaneous sources, so a budget-focused 8-channel analog board would likely be a better value for you. On the flip side, if you regularly manage live events with multiple monitors, need to send separate mixes to stage wedges, and want to run a house mix while also feeding a recording stream, this console gives you the flexibility you need without having to stack external gear. One of the practical strengths that keeps showing up in real-world talk is the touchscreen display. It isn't just a glossy gimmick, the layout actually lets you navigate through channels, route matrix buses, and adjust AUX sends with a few taps. In a loud house setting where you're on your feet, being able to pull up a channel strip without squinting at a tiny knob array makes the difference between staying focused on the performance or getting lost in the mix. The 4 matrix buses become especially handy when you need to feed a front-of-house console, a dedicated broadcast feed, and a monitor mix simultaneously. I've watched venues use the matrix to send the main mix to the house speakers while a separate matrix carries a clean feed to an outside streaming rig, all without rerouting cables on the fly. On the downside, the learning curve can be a bit steeper than expected. The interface is dense, and while the touchscreen helps, you still have to dig through menus to access some of the deeper routing options. For someone used to the tactile feedback of a classic analog board, the reliance on menus can feel unintuitive at first. That's not a hardware flaw, just a reality check. You'll need to spend a few sessions mastering the workflow before you can run it confidently in a live environment. The manual is thorough, but it's thick enough to double as a coffee table book, so having a quick reference cheat sheet on hand is definitely worth it. Another practical weakness that pops up when you actually press play is the lack of onboard effects processing. Some digital consoles bundle reverb, delay, and compression, but the C Impact leaves those spaces open. If you rely on built-in effects for vocal or instrument processing, you'll need to route external processors or use a DAW to insert them. For many venues, that's not a huge issue because they already have dedicated effects racks, but it does mean an extra piece of gear you have to manage and patch in. Let's talk about daily usability. The two-handed use of the touchscreen combined with physical channel faders feels balanced after you get past the initial menu navigation. I've seen sound techs run a full church service up to 30 inputs, 3 monitor mixes, and a streamed multi-track without having to pause and stare at a laptop. The 20 AUX buses give you plenty of room for monitor mixes, FX sends, or even separate mixes for different zones in a venue. In practice, you can assign each musician a custom mix, which is a huge morale boost for performers who want more control over what they hear on stage. Value for money is where the C Impact really starts to earn its stripes. You're paying for a console that packs both a high-quality mic preamp bank and a full-featured USB interface into one chassis. Compare that to buying an analog board and then adding a separate 32-in/32-out USB converter. The combined cost typically surpasses the price.